This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The Palestinian President, Mahmoud Abbas, reiterated his rejection of talks with Hamas unless it reverses its coup d'etat against the Palestinian Authority in the Gaza Strip. Abbas added that the Rafah border crossing will only reopen in accordance with the EU-sponsored agreement signed in 2005.
We told Hamas more than once, we are willing to hold a dialogue with them provided they end their coup d'etat in Gaza, accept all international obligations, and accept holding early elections. After that, our hearts are open for any dialogue. Unfortunately, Hamas has not so far accepted our conditions.
Abbas's remarks came as he was leaving Abu Dhabi today after a visit to the United Arab Emirates. Meanwhile, the residents of the Gaza Strip woke up, as usual, to the sound of the Israeli war machinery. In a pre-dawn offensive that lasted for several hours, the Israeli occupation army carried out a wide-scale incursion in Palestinian neighborhoods east of Gaza City. Hamas activists in the Zaytun neighborhood confronted the Israeli army, triggering clashes between the two sides. One Israeli soldier and 9 Palestinians, including civilians, were wounded during the clashes. In another development, the Egyptian security forces discovered approximately 250 kilograms of the highly explosive TNT hidden in a cemetery in the Egyptian part of Rafah. According to Egyptian security sources, the explosives were to be smuggled into the Gaza Strip. No one was arrested in connection with the case. Meanwhile, Israel is gearing up for a possible large-scale assault on the Gaza Strip, as disclosed by top Israeli military and political leaders. The residents of the Gaza Strip have no choice but to wait and see what the next round of bombardment delivered by Israeli tanks and warplanes will inflict on them. To make the situation worse, the animosity and political gap between the rivals, Hamas and Fatah, seems to be widening every day. Zuhair Sakala reports from Gaza.
The methods of execution may be different, but the objective is the same. This news comes after the Israeli ground forces launched an attack on the Zaytun neighborhood east of Gaza City. The attack didn't last long after the Palestinian resistance confronted the invading force and pushed it out of the city. Meanwhile, the occupation forces said that they will definitely put an end to Palestinian rocket attacks, even if it means wiping out entire neighborhoods in Gaza.
Israeli incursions and offensives are not a new development in the Gaza Strip. However, through this incursion, Israel may try to divide the Gaza Strip into 3 or 4 parts, including the area of the Salah ad-Din Square. If Israel succeeds in its plan, the residents of the Gaza Strip will witness an unprecedented campaign of assault and terror.
The Israeli threats against the Gaza Strip will no doubt carry serious repercussions here, especially since many residents are no longer able to make ends meet and many others lost loved ones. In addition, the Israeli blockade imposed on the residents of the Gaza Strip has become the story of their life.
The current economic situation in the Gaza Strip is very bad. If Israel carries out its aggression, the situation will become worse.
We have become used to the aggression. The word escalation is not new vocabulary to us.
What more can they do to break the will of the residents in Gaza? They tried everything, including incursions, assassinations, and blockades.
Incursions, shelling, and assassinations are different sides of the same coin. Israel will not break the will of this nation, a nation that suffers so much on the path to freedom. Between the political maneuvers and the military threats, the residents here have no choice but to wait and see what's coming next. This news comes amidst an internal Palestinian division that seems to be widening every day.
زهير ساقلة تلفزيون دبي غزة.
The Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert said that all options must be considered to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. In a joint press conference with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, Olmert said that no option should be ignored. He added that he is certain that the Iranians are working seriously to produce unconventional weapons and that half of Iranian nuclear activities are carried out in secrecy.
Israel is on the opinion that
the Iranians are still moving forward with their plans to create a capacity for non-conventional weapons. Nothing that we know has changed our attitude.
Joining us, Al Jazeera's bureau chief in Berlin, Aktham Suleiman. Aktham, why did the talks which focused on Iran's nuclear file took place in Berlin?
Berlin is not the first stop. Olmert was in Moscow at the end of last year. Now he's in Berlin. He is on a general trip to explain the Israeli viewpoint that Iran poses a big danger and that it should not be ignored. The perception that Iran poses a threat was undermined a little bit with the latest United States intelligence estimate report. Support for this perception has decreased in both Russia and the United States during the election year. Israel feels that there is a lack of concern for what it perceives as an important issue, which is the Iranian nuclear file. A few weeks ago, Iran reached an agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency. The results of this agreement will appear in March. At this time, Olmert is trying to remind everyone about this issue. Berlin is a good stop for this purpose because of the historical ties between the two countries.
Does this show that Israel is disappointed with Washington, which Israel used to depend on to resolve this issue?
I think that the Israeli disappointment stems from the fact that the Iranians have succeeded to extend the issue until the election year, which means that no one has the time to address it in a serious manner. The American position has always been supportive of Israel. Olmert said in the press conference in Berlin that all options are on the table, including the military one. The American president said the same thing at an earlier time. However, now it seems that the military option is more likely to be carried out by Israel if it should happen.
What is the probability that Israel will launch a military strike, especially when considering that the American elections are still the dominant issue in the U.S. and will continue to be so for 1 year, even after the election of a new president?
Of course, several months ago, Israel would have been the first candidate to attack Iran or launch a strike on certain areas in it. One can argue that the purpose of Olmert's trip to the European capitals, including Berlin, is to test the waters and see if such an attack can be accepted. The German response was clear today: yes to pressuring Iran and yes to being suspicious of Iran, but it still prefers the diplomatic option. However, we all know that Israel will not base its decision on the view of Germany, France, or any other country if it thinks it should carry out an attack against Iran.
Can the opposition to attacking Iran in the Gulf affect Israel's decision?
This is an important question, but the decision depends on Tel Aviv. Israel has complete confidence that Iran poses a threat. Olmert and the Israelis, though, speculate that Iran's nuclear program must have military objectives without having real evidence. If Israel acquires evidence, it will act within an hour. For the Israelis, this is a matter of life and death. The Germans and the French might object, and the Americans might be bothered by the timing. However, at the end of the day, Israel would get the support of all these countries, including Germany, of course.
We thank Aktham Suleiman, our bureau chief in Berlin.
We're turning now to the intense situation along the Gaza border. We're joined by policy analyst Dan Diker of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Dan, thanks for coming in.
Laura, thank you.
What's your take on this military buildup to raise the pressure on Hamas to stop the rocket fire, or is Israel about to launch the much-anticipated ground operation?
I think it's fair to say that that Defense Minister Barak's statements to the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee this week, as well as the given situation in Gaza, represents a very serious strategic problem for Israel in the south. You might remember Hamas's detonation on January 23rd and the subsequent massive flow into Gaza and out of Gaza of terror operatives both ways, and massive inflows of anti-tank and anti-aircraft ordnance has created a situation, in addition to the hundreds of rocket launchers that Hamas has, that Israel cannot continue to launch pinpoint operations to try to slow down this type of attack from Hamas.
So this just isn't a scare tactic. This is real preparation for a large-scale incursion.
It seems pretty clear, not only from the statements but from the year-long preparation of the IDF, that there's really a countdown to a major ground operation in Gaza. The IDF has been saying there's really no other way to stop short-range rocket attacks against southern Israel other than taking a decision to a defensive shield 2 in Gaza. This is something, by the way, that the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee Chairman Yuval Steinitz has been talking about for 2.5 years, and that position is shared by the military. Strategic depth on the ground, control on the ground in Gaza, from a military standpoint, defense standpoint, is critical to stopping this type of rocket fire. There's really very little other option to do it.
Dan, you're a foreign policy analyst. Israeli leaders have been visiting key foreign capitals trying to build support and understanding for a possible military action. Would there be backing from the U.S. or Europe if Israel did decide to do that military action? Well,
clearly there's an indication today that Chancellor Merkel of Germany is very sympathetic to Prime Minister Olmert's observations and warnings about what's happening in Gaza. The United States administration has also expressed great sympathies for the ongoing attacks against Israel. Having said that, both the Europeans and the Americans are opposed to a large-scale ground invasion by Israel, because it is their view that the Annapolis process, the bilateral peace process with the Palestinians, would essentially be buried if Israel were to engage in a large-scale ground operation in Gaza for a couple of reasons. Number one, on a tactical level, there's no way to conduct negotiations with the Palestinian Authority out of Ramallah or any other city in the midst of and in the aftermath of a full ground operation. Number two, the strategic option has to be considered, that in the same way that in 2006 war, Israel was attacked from Gaza and then from southern Lebanon by the Hamas, that Israel's potential offensive now in Gaza could lead to a widening of the theater and trigger some sort of a Syrian attack or Hezbollah Syrian attack against Israel. So Israel could find itself in a two-front war.
Dan Diker, Senior Foreign Policy Analyst with the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Laura.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict will be high on the agenda for whoever becomes the next U.S. president. That's the view of EU Middle East envoy Tony Blair, who told Israel Television's Yaakov Achimeir that President Bush is determined to leave a settlement of the crisis as his legacy.
I think there is a general understanding now in the American political system that I think was not there a few years back. And I think that President Bush and his determination, which I think he is showing to try to reach an agreement, is an indication of how the American political system as a whole is changing. Nobody thinks, and this is important to emphasize, that the reason why we have this global terrorism and struggle against extremism, nobody thinks that the origin is in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Or if they do, they're wrong, right? It is not the fault of Israel, it's not the fault of the Palestinians. The origins of this are far broader. However, I do think people understand, to a greater degree now than ever before in America, that if we could get a just and fair solution to the Israel-Palestine issue, on the basis of Israel's security, but on the basis of an independent Palestinian state, if we could do that, then it would have a tremendous and powerful impact in favor of the forces of moderation in the world as a whole. So I think, you asked me, will the next president really invest is it that President Bush, like President Clinton, towards the end of their time?
Well, we know that America is very close to you.
My assessment of this is that it will be a priority for any incoming American president as well, because it is important in itself, but it also has this wider significance in the global struggle in which we are now engaged.
Freedom of the press often being called one of the first casualties of conflict, and in the Palestinian territories, the ongoing struggle, the political struggle between Hamas and Gaza and Fatah in the West Bank is now affecting the media.
Well, increasingly it's being used as a political weapon, with newspapers and radio stations coming under pressure. Noor O'Day has this report.
Cartoons like this will not be tolerated in Gaza. Mocking a controversial Hamas-run parliament session last November, the cartoon was published in the prominent daily newspaper Al-Ayyam, a paper based in Ramallah with wide distribution in Gaza. A Hamas-appointed court in Gaza has now banned its printing and publication in Gaza, even symbolically sentencing its chief editor and cartoonist who live in Ramallah to jail time and fines. Al-Ayyam's cartoonist Baha al-Bukhari is unapologetic. In his 44 years as a cartoonist, he has survived many similar controversies. Al-Bukhari doesn't hide his opposition to the Hamas takeover of Gaza, but he believes it's more dangerous to restrict the expression of opinions than to express them in the first place.
You have to stand with justice. I don't adopt anyone's view. I am a person who expresses the opinion and concern of the Palestinian people.
In the West Bank, political pressure has had the same banning effect on two Hamas-affiliated papers based in Gaza. Since June, Palestine and Al-Risala newspapers have not been able to find printing firms or distributors there. Palestine's chief editor says these difficulties are connected to politics.
There's a deterioration in the status of the freedom of expression stemming from the political struggle or division between Hamas and Fatah, or the officials here in Gaza and those in Ramallah.
But it's not just bans on print media. It also extends to radio stations that were silenced during the Gaza takeover. Some of their journalists even chased out of the Gaza Strip. Now one of these radio stations is relaunching, this time not from Gaza, but from here in Ramallah. Al-Hurriya, or Freedom Radio, never hid its affiliation with the Fatah movement. But after 8 months of silence on the airways, this is the radio's first live radio talk show. Topic of choice, the situation in Hamas-controlled Gaza. The radio's managing editor, Tawfiq Abu Khousa, says no media is completely objective, but fears balance has been lost in local media.
The media is an essential part of the battle. It's one of the strategic weapons in this political fight. That's why I'm not surprised when the media pays the price for this division. Media must speak the truth, and that is at the heart of the battle.
Al-Hurriya can be heard in Gaza once again. And for these journalists, that's a victory of words over guns. Noor O'Day, Al Jazeera, Ramallah.
من جديد وجه القاضي اللبناني جان فهد اتهامات إلى 3 من ضباط الجيش
The Lebanese judge, John Fahad, charged 3 army officers and 16 soldiers in connection with the killing of opposition protesters last month in what has become known as Black Sunday. The judge charged the military personnel of involuntary manslaughter of 6 protesters. He blamed the death of the 7th protester on an unknown assailant. Adnan Ghallouch has the details from Beirut.
The Lebanese military court took a step forward, partly in order to reduce the tense atmosphere, which followed the incidents in the Manim Hayal region on January 27th. The military court magistrate, Judge Jean Fahad, charged 3 army officers and 16 soldiers, as well as 60 civilians, according to the penal code. The charges carry a maximum sentence of 5 years of hard labor.
The charges are a very important step and have caught the attention of the entire Arab world, not just Lebanon. This army has complete self-confidence, which allows it not to escape from judicial investigation, which has resulted in revealing that some elements and military personnel have caused these painful incidents.
The Amal and Hezbollah movements refrained from making any comments about the prosecutor's charges against the military personnel and those being investigated for being involved in the incidents in what has been dubbed as Black Sunday. The public expressed reservations about the prosecutor's judgments.
These charges should have served justice and should have been stronger. These defendants should have been tried in court based on the magnitude of the crimes that they've committed.
We have high respect for the army and view it as our source of strength as a people and citizens. But I want to say generally, they should say that there are some infiltrators in the army.
The victims' families who call for giving those allegedly involved in the killing the maximum punishment rejected the fact that those involved were not charged with murder.
When my brother was martyred, Martyr Hayek fell on the top of him, and so did the paramedic Martyr Amhaz. The bullets were intentionally aimed at their hearts. Those who were shooting at them were hunting them like birds and killed them with ease and in cold blood. To say that the killings were not intentional is unacceptable.
The charges against military personnel and civilians in the incidents that have been dubbed Black Sunday coincided with news about an agreement between the army leadership and the movements of Amal and Hezbollah to form a civilian riot group that will work and coordinate with the army to monitor any disturbances that may occur during protests.
ومعنا من بيروت العميد الركن المتقاعد الدكتور هشام جابر مدير مركز الشرق الأوسط.
With us from Beirut is retired Lieutenant General Dr. Hisham Jabir, the Director of Middle East Studies Center. Welcome, Dr. Jabir. Will this outcome and these charges reduce tensions, or are they unconvincing for some, including the victims' families, as we heard, or the opposition groups?
أو بالنسبة لأطراف المعارضة.
The direct answer to this question is that these measures have contributed and will greatly contribute in picking up the pieces of that bloody Sunday and restoring credibility in the army, which some people have appeared to question since the incidents on that bloody Sunday, during which 7 people were killed and tens of others were injured. For the first time in the history of Lebanon, the military court intervenes, charging officers and soldiers, as the report stated, 3 officers and 16 soldiers with manslaughter. Manslaughter, that is involuntary manslaughter.
Unintentional manslaughter?
No, not unintentional, but involuntary. That is what the law states. I think that the soldier who fired the shots killed someone, but he did not know the person he was shooting at. So we need to re-examine the law to know the difference between intentional manslaughter and premeditated manslaughter and involuntary manslaughter. I think that the military prosecutor applied the laws of the military court for the first time in the history of Lebanon. This is an unprecedented measure against officers and military personnel to bring them into the military court. I think that the military judge, Rashid Nizar, will release his comprehensive judgment in the next few days. This case is public and will now be determined by the court.
Our correspondent in Fallujah provided us with this special report. Fallujah was once considered the most dangerous city in Iraq. Al-Qaeda mistreated the residents of the city, which forced them to rebel. Ultimately, they formed security agencies and the so-called Awakening Council to fight and expel Al-Qaeda.
Under tight security measures, Abu Ma'ruf is taking us along with him to show us his headquarters in the small town near Al-Fallujah in Khan Dari. A few months ago, this man was fighting the American forces, but now he leads 13,000 men, most of whom were former Al-Qaeda members. Abu Ma'ruf is betting that one day the Sunnis will return to power with the help of the Americans, who will acknowledge the Sunnis' role in saving them.
If we had not taken this course of action, our efforts would have been wasted. These men would have become mujahideen, militias, gangsters or something else.
Signs of war and destruction remain very visible as a testimony to the ferocity of the fighting that took place here. Countless numbers of Al-Qaeda members like these men have been arrested by the order of Abu Ma'ruf's older brother. He also used to fight the American forces, but now he is the chief of police.
Everyone should decide for himself. They beheaded one of my brothers with a razor blade. I looked for my brother's head for 4 days, but I couldn't find it.
The number of people being killed in Fallujah has declined, although no ceasefire agreement has been brokered. If the legitimacy of the Sunnis is not recognized at the national level in Iraq, the Americans will have to count their dead soldiers by the dozens. The most senior Muslim scholar in Britain said that he believes that the statements made by the leader of the Anglican Church, Rowan Williams, about Sharia or Islamic law were significantly misunderstood. However, he feels that Williams will try to correct his statements only to calm anger. Last week, the Archbishop of Canterbury provoked debate when he hinted that including Islamic elements into the British law will be unavoidable.
لا تزال الضجة التي أثارتها تصريحات كبير أساقفة الكنيسة الأنجليكانية.
There is still much buzz about the statements made by the most senior bishop in the Anglican Church, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, who spoke of granting Muslims freedom to apply some aspects of the Islamic law. Williams' statements continue to draw official and public reactions. On the official side, the Times newspaper stated that the Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, spoke to Williams on the phone and urged him to clarify what he meant by these statements. Meanwhile, 150 members of the Church Council said they are thinking of resigning if he did not take back his statements. On the public level, opinions were divided between British Christians who do not want their laws to be modified and Muslims who view the application of Islamic law as their right.
I just think that anybody that lives in this country should abide by British law.
I just think that anybody that lives in this country should abide by British law. British law is not Sharia law, but is decided by the government.
The Sharia law in the modern world is
Sharia law in the modern is being debated now. Applying Sharia law in the modern world, I think, is going to contradict with Christianity.
Of course, I support giving our brotherly Muslims in this country more freedom in their decisions. All other religions have gotten all their rights, except for, regrettably, the Muslims, due to oppression, which I think is the main reason.
In his speech to the General Synod, the Church of England's National Assembly, the Archbishop of Canterbury seemed to be carefully choosing his words so that they would not be misunderstood as an apology on one side or a change of opinion on the other. He said that he takes responsibility for the confusion that surrounded his statements, but at the same time he defended his position and thanked those who have supported him.
I'm deeply grateful to many of you.
I am deeply grateful to many of you for the support as well as the challenges I have received this weekend and for your willingness to treat all this as a serious issue that deserves attention. But I believe quite strongly that it is not inappropriate for a pastor of the Church of England to address issues around the perceived concerns of other religious communities and to try and bring them into better public focus.
The debates surrounding this issue did not begin today. The most significant about them is that these statements came from the most senior church authority in Britain. It is expected that the debate about this issue will continue well into the future. Basel Al-Jubri, Saudi Arabia TV, London.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/Mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs. Programs which connect you to the world.